Many times when we hit the season of Advent, we immediately think of the birth of Christ at Christmas. But the first 2 weeks of Advent are more focused on the second coming of Christ. St. Bernard of Clairvaux speaks about the three comings of Christ into the world, the first being his birth over 2,000 years ago, the second at the end of time when he comes again, and the third time when he comes into our life individually in a particular way at our baptism. And so when we talk about the end times, the theological term that we use to talk about that is eschatology, the study that is concerned with the death, judgment, and the final destiny of all mankind. The word eschatology comes from the word eschaton, which is the final event in the divine plan. And so the second reading today from 2 Peter leads us to ponder the final article of the Nicene Creed that we recite here in a few moments, which says, "I confess one baptism for the forgiveness of sins, and I look forward to the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come." The end of time, the end of our lives, the preparation for the eschaton. I think there's four things for us to ponder in this second letter of St. Peter today. I believe it is time, patience, the apostolic proclamation, and the moral imperative that this eschatology implies. Number one, time. It's important for us when we think about the end times that God's time is not our time. So when the letter says, "Do not ignore this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord, one day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like one day." It's a biblical description of what time is like for God. And we also have to remember that in the time of 2 Peter, the calendar that they used was not the same calendar that we use today. And so even their study of time and their description of time is even different than the way that we talk about time, the way that we talk about months and days and years as well. The second part of time is that in the time of the early Christians, there was this belief that began to rise up that the end would come at the time of the death of John, St. John, or that St. John would see the end. And the reason that this belief popped up, because remember that Peter asked Jesus, what is going to happen to John? John was the beloved disciple. John was the one who was at the cross. And when Peter is asked by our Lord, "Do you love me?" 3 different times, Peter then asks the question, what's going to happen to that disciple? And Jesus basically responds by saying, it's none of your business. I will do with him whatever God's plan is for him. And so this belief arose that St. John would see the end time. And so people were preparing their lives very, very much so in order to see the end of time. Then, of course, when Peter died, then when John died and the end didn't come, they had to kind of turn their eyes and begin to understand that the end of time was not in their time, not in the way that they understood it, but would come at the time and the day that was the exact time that God desired for it to come. The second aspect of eschatology, I believe, then is patience. This aspect of patience is not our patience awaiting the end of time, but is more about God's patience. God is patient with us in the sense that when God allows time, he is allowing mankind to convert, allowing mankind to turn their hearts to God. It is God's mercy that he continues to allow us to live so that we may convert. Because once we die, there is no opportunity for conversion. That is the end of the opportunity for change and conversion. And then we are judged. We are judged by our actions. We are judged by the way in which we love God and love our neighbor. And so God is patient, allowing mankind to have the opportunity, to have the time to be able to be converted, to know God, and to live in him, such that then they may be brought into eternal life at the end of time. And then thirdly, the apostolic proclamation, or what some would call the imminence of the end. Imminence being the presence to us, which in the world today, opposite of the transcendence, which goes above and beyond our world today. And this apostolic proclamation is the fact that the end is near. We don't know when, but the end is near. The end is near, and the end has been coming, and the end is proclaimed at the death and resurrection of Christ. So the end of the world is coming. We don't know when, but it has been ushered in with the death and the resurrection of Christ. And so whenever God deems it ready for that to happen, then it will happen. When we talk about the heavens and earth passing away, this is Jewish imagery. It's Jewish imagery for the cosmos, for the entire universe. It's not about heaven itself passing away, but it's about the heavens and earth passing away. It's about total destruction, about the way in which it will be, the way in which the earth and the cosmos will be destroyed. But the way in which it will be destroyed is not just a total obliteration into nothingness, but there is, in a sense, a regeneration, a recreation, in a sense. When Christ dies, there is a new creation, a recreation, in which we begin to understand ourselves in a new way. There was the time before Christ in which the people's understanding of God was different than ours, because we have Christ born into the world who takes on human flesh and shows us the way to the Father by walking our steps and showing us the way, showing us how to suffer, showing us how to pray to God, whereas God revealed himself in a different way in the Old Testament. Same God, but just revealed to us in a different way. And so there will be this, when the heavens and earth pass away, it's Jewish imagery for the cosmos, the universe, not for heaven itself. We also see in our passage today from the second letter of St. Peter that even Peter doesn't know when this is going to happen, only that it will happen by fire. And it says this: since everything is to be dissolved in this way, what sort of persons ought you to be, conducting yourselves in holiness and devotion, waiting for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be dissolved in flames and the elements melted by fire. Kind of some frightening imagery maybe that ought not to put fear into our lives, ought not to put fear into us, but a trust in what God is doing for us and a trust in what God is doing in our world, that God will bring about this regeneration, this recreation in his way, and that we ought to be preparing ourselves constantly for that. Another couple of ways in which we talk about this regeneration is the phrase, the day of the Lord, or the parousia or the parousia, depending on how you hear it. But these words are the same words that talk about the eschatology, the coming of God into the world in order to make new what he has created. And fourthly, that eschatology has a moral imperative. St. Peter speaks about that. He says, conducting yourselves in holiness and devotion. If we are going to come to our end, at the end of time, if the world is going to pass away, and we know that the world will pass away, when we die, we ought to be constantly preparing ourselves by living a life of holiness and a life of piety. We ought to have a certain detachment from the world, recognizing that this world will be consumed. It will pass away. This world will be consumed. It will pass away. If we focus all of our hope and our trust in the things of this world, and they pass away, what else will we have? We will have nothing. And so we place all of our hope, we place all of our piety, all of our holiness, and we place it all in Jesus Christ, in our God. Holiness means to be set apart for God, set apart for the worship of God. We oftentimes hear it as set apart from sin, which is an aspect of it as well. The word secularism comes from the word secula. The word secula means world, or to be of this age. So when we are commanded to have Sunday as a day of rest, Sunday is a partaking of this new creation that God has established for us. When we do not rest on Sunday, we are partaking of the saecula. We are partaking of the world. We are partaking of this age and not of the age to come. Sunday is the first day of creation in Genesis. It is the day of the resurrection, or the eighth day, the new creation. It points to a new creation, so that when we rest on Sunday, we anticipate the new heavens and the new earth, the new creation that God is bringing about, which began in Jesus rising from the tomb. If we believe that Jesus rose from the dead and that the bodily resurrection is a foretaste of the new creation, then we ought to live that way every week, meaning that we ought to live for Sunday, recognizing that this is the commemoration of the coming of the Lord. This is the commemoration of the new heavens and the new earth that God is ushering in, because this world is passing away and a greater one is coming, in which we participate in by our participation in that Sunday rest. And that Sunday rest begins with coming to worship our God in the Holy Mass. And so when we think about eschatology, when we think about the end times, it ought not bring about a tremendous amount of fear and anxiety. There is a little bit of fear of the Lord that comes with that because of the unknown, that we as humans, when we can't control it and we can't grasp it, there's a little bit of fear that comes in with that. But when we place all of our hope and place all of our trust and all of who we are in our God, and place all of our hope in Him, then that fear is dispelled. When we know Christ, when we know God, that fear dissipates, because we know that we will live in God and that we will live in God forever. That's the whole purpose of who we are. When we celebrate Advent, it is the recognition that Christ is coming. When? We don't know. Our time will come to go and meet Christ, but we take this time that we have to prepare for that moment when we will go to meet God, to live a life of holiness, to live a life of piety, to put away the things of the world so we may live for God and to live for God alone.